Thank you all. A fascinating way of looking at Israel like it's never been told before, as far as I can tell. And thank you all for being a part. I want to start, before we get to our Q&A, I want to put the audience on the spot a little bit. How many people in the audience, and we won't write this down, but how many people describe themselves on the left? Will describe themselves on the left. Don't worry, we won't, no trouble here. Okay, we're on the Upper West Side after all. Interesting to know, and thank you for the feedback. We would love more feedback, so we have some forums outside. I would love all of your feedback to know more of where you all came from. Please, it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of the advisors on the making of this film and series. And again, two reminders. One, the rest of the series is on otherisraelondemand.org. Check it out, otherisraelondemand.org. And secondly, when you leave, if the conversation is going on, which is going to start at 8 o'clock, remember to leave quietly. So as I was saying, one of the advisors is wearing that hat today, somebody who's been involved with Israeli politics and as a partner in the festival in different ways. Please welcome Anat Saragusti. And to lead the conversation, journalist and newscaster and friend of the festival, Ms. Lucy Irish.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm sorry for my voice. I'm a little bit cold. Cold just getting into New York and just catching it on the cold. I think one of the biggest controversies, let's say conversations that Israelis have in the last few years is about the inner discussion in Israel. And the inner discussion in Israel is, and one of the points that we put out here in one of the discussions is, how can a country that is so divided in itself can reach to a certain agreement with the others, with the Palestinians, with the Arab world, when there's so many divisions in the Israeli society, and we mean like Sephardi and Ashkenazi, we mean Ethiopians, Russians, secular, non-secular. This is not something that, let me put it out there, it's just that a society cannot reach peace among others when it cannot reach peace with itself.
It's a great question, it's a big question. I think maybe I have two answers for that. First of all, I think that the diversity in the Israeli society is an asset that we don't appreciate enough. And the founders of the state wanted this melting pot, and they wanted all to be the same. And in a way, they wanted all to look like, the Eastern European type. In doing so, with all the good intentions, they lost the diversity, which we should really, really appreciate, because it makes us so unique and so different. And we have so many things with this diversity, and I think we don't recognize it enough. So this is one type of question that we should really. The other thing is I think, comes from a different perspective. I think we didn't manage to create an Israeli nation. There is not enough content in the Israeliness of us that connect us together. It's the Jewish people. When you speak about Am Israel, it's me as an Israeli Jew, and you as if there are Jews among the audience. It doesn't include you as an Arab Israeli.
Especially so Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu always in his speeches uses this term Am Israel. He ignores 20% of the other society that lives in Israel.
So he speaks about me and you. This is Am Israel. And when you speak about what is an Israeli, what does it mean to hold this blue ID card, if there is any content to it, there is none. Although there should be. We should have been a nation that includes all these diverse communities national communities and ethnic communities, and we could really celebrate that. But we were doing something else, and we didn't invest in creating this nationality.
You know, in one way or another, some people will say that the left in Israel lost. The left in Israel lost to understand the Israeli society. They lost to really communicate. Like I'm saying about, like for example, the Israeli Arab leaders, that they are not able to actually understand or maybe to get the message out there in the correct way that they will reach the majority. And in one way or another, maybe the left lost the way. The left doesn't have a leader that is actually can lead the left and into this common, let's say, thinking that the left is thinking in Israel or the left is believing in Israel. In one way or another, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it seems that the left is dying in Israel.
I hope not, but yeah, maybe, at least in numbers, according to the polls. But I think what the series tries to illustrate is that the left didn't make it to be left from the beginning. And all the way they were trying to maneuver, you know, between the creation of the state on the ruins of the 48 Palestinians, and then, you know, when the immigration from the Arab countries came, how to, you know, have them, but not have them too close, you know, to kind of stain, you know, the Ashkenazi leading group. And then, you know, when the social gaps came, how to do that. So they were kind of maneuvering and didn't have a very solid, straight way that keeps all of it together. As he says, you know, the equality, the solidarity, you know, the socialism. Sorry for saying that. I know that among Americans, socialism is like, you know, red flag, which is a red flag. But it's more about, you know, equality, and it comes from the European ideology and, you know, things that for Americans it's like.
But exactly at this point, actually in the last elections in Israel, that was maybe the wave that everyone tried to climb up on. It's like they tried to climb up on this mountain. All the parties talked about equality in the Israeli society, about reaching to a point that all Israelis, that the middle class is equal, that there will be equal rights between, especially in the economic point of view. But today, like, let's say, in the last few months, we are hearing all these parties that talked about equality starting to talk about the peace process that they didn't talk about before in the election time. They didn't put it on the table, and maybe I'm like out of my mind. Yeah, fantasizing. Maybe in one way or another, it is connected. Maybe it is connected that you cannot ignore the peace process. You cannot ignore the region and say, okay, now I'm focusing only on inner problems, just like what is happening in the United States with the foreign policy and let's say, the inner problems that Barack Obama is facing.
The social protest in 2011 was deliberately not speaking about the occupation. They didn't want to speak about the occupation because they were afraid, again, same thing with the left. They were maneuvering themselves how to be nice to everybody and how to have the most broader camp of people that would come and demonstrate with them and say, wow, we had 100,000 people marching today in Tel Aviv against the social gaps and the economic situation. We had half a million people.
Which for Israel, for people to understand, it's a lot.
It's a huge demonstration.
It was a huge demonstration. It's something like that happens once in a lifetime, that Israelis actually go out on the streets and actually demonstrate about the cost of living.
Week after week,
yes,
for the whole summer. So in order to be in that record of numbers of people who were out there in the street, they alienated themselves from, you know, from the occupation. Excuse me for saying that. As the occupation, and I know again, in the American context, you tend to speak about the conflict and less about the occupation, but still, there is an occupation which is a legal term going on there. So they didn't want to speak about that because it's too divisive, it's too inflammatory, it's too contagious to speak about the occupation. So let's speak about social change. Everybody knows what it means to go to the grocery store and not being able to buy cottage cheese. This was about the cottage cheese. But then again, you know, the occupation was there. And now it's suddenly we see that it's not numb. It's live
on the table.
Exactly. So now you have to address that.
You know, one of the things that before we will open it to questions, this overview of this chapter opens with the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Something changed since this assassination. It seems that the Israeli society is going more and more to the right. And the question is it going more and more to the right, or is it the lack of leadership that we are finding in the Israeli society, that we're not finding any leaders, actual leaders that can reach to the people, that can tell them, listen, I'm right now going to take a decision, I'm going to meet with President Mahmoud Abbas, I'm going to do some peace, I'm going to do the peace process, and you will have to accept that. Maybe we don't have any more leaders like that.
I think that in the Rabin's era, we had some kind of hope. We had a hope that if we reach an agreement, you know, the future will look better. And this hope was lost with these 3 shots of Rabin. The next thing is the leadership. You know, I made a documentary on Shulamit Aloni. You know who Shulamit Aloni is?
She was the education minister.
She was the most, I think, prominent politician, woman politician in Israel. She died a year ago. And she used to say, you know, there's a saying from the Hebrew writings, Pnei Ador ki Pnei HaKelev, that the face of the generation is like the dog. What does it mean? It means that the dog runs before his master and he looks back all the time to see if his master follows him. So this is not leadership. You know, if a leader goes before everybody else and looks back all the time and check the polls and the ratings and to see if they're following him, this is not really leadership. Leadership is you lead, you know your way, and you go where you want to go, and you are sure that everybody is following you. And this is what we're lacking now, this kind of leadership that is confident enough to do something, sometimes brave, sometimes out of the way, sometimes something that was not in the first, you know, kind of ideology of its own party, of elections or whatever, but something that's needed to be done now. And this is something that we are missing.
But we cannot not say that the left maybe lost the hope. Maybe the left is not able to create or to put out there a new leader that will speak in the level, or will speak to the people of Israel and tell them, okay, like Yitzhak Rabin. Because it seems that Benjamin Netanyahu in the next elections will be elected again. And it seems that maybe he is, or Bennett, or maybe he is catching something that the left is not catching. Maybe the left has lost to understand. Maybe the left is not understanding the Israeli society.
Maybe. I mean, but still I want to hold some hope to ourselves, because this hope is my sanity, you know. Because I see my country, I don't know, committing suicide. Because not going, or not doing everything, but everything it can to get an agreement. I'm not talking about peace, and I'm not naive. To get any kind of agreement, you know, with our neighbors, whoever they are, the Palestinians, of course, first and foremost, but then all of the other moderate forces in the region. I mean, this is crazy. So this is a fading kind of camp, but I need to have this hope as a citizen of Israel.
Yeah, let's open this to your questions, of course, now here in the audience.
In an address that Rabin made to the Knesset very shortly before his assassination, he outlined his vision of what a settlement would be. And it was very, very far to the right of the things that Netanyahu has said recently. way to the right of almost anything you hear today. Question is, was this truly Rabin speaking, or was this said simply because he needed the political coverage?
Maybe it's both, you know, because what Rabin did was to differentiate between the political settlements and the rest of the settlements. And he made this very clear. Now, this is the leadership that I spoke about. You know, a leader, even though he has a mindset or worldview, and he sees and he reads the reality, and he decides that the reality needs a different solution. This is what happened to him. He was a very militaristic, you know, very right-wing, conservative general. And suddenly he realized that maybe there is another path that he maybe should explore, and he did that. And, you know, the rest is history.
I have a question here. This movie, getting back to what the movie was actually about, seemed to me about the myth of socialism and the myth of what Israel was in its earliest days. And Ben-Gurion, it seemed, he cut and pasted what was good for him to create a country. He was a very pragmatic person. And all of the press that Israel got for being a socialistic country, you know, everybody equal, etc., was because it was easier for him. When he created his Tadrut, it was much easier for him to control how the country was run because it was basically run by the government, like in Russia. So this movie seems to me about dispelling the myth of what Israel was from the beginning. Was that the intention?
Exactly. The idea was to deconstruct or to question all those myths, you know, that the country, that Israel was built by the left. So let's see what this left is. And the left, you know, the ultimate left is exactly that: equality, solidarity among all, you know, equality for all, and socialism. And he kind of checked it and saw that not everything, all these ingredients are in this meal. But on the other hand, you know, I guess, and he says it in the film as well, the state had not been created if not for this, you know, assertiveness of Ben-Gurion, and we should praise him for that.
Yes, seems to me that the left has lost power and influence because the left is sort of associated with prospects for peace. With the intifadas, the various intifadas, the rejected offer in Oslo, and the continued rejectionism by the Palestinians, it's no wonder that the left has lost power.
So is it a question or a comment?
The comment is, do you think, do you think that the left can revive? Because is there any way that the Palestinians will come to the table and be willing to negotiate with the Israelis to make peace, or that they continue to reject the very existence of the state?
I don't think we should get into the blaming struggle. Who's to blame for what? I want to hope that yes, and I
maybe you are being, maybe like the left is being blamed on not losing the hope that the Palestinians are an equal partner, are a partner for peace. But it seems that because the main blame for the Palestinians is that for the left, I'm sorry, is that they care more about the Palestinians than their own country. And when you come and ask a leftist, he says, "I care about my country more than even a rightist will care about it." So, you know, maybe this is the main blame. Maybe you, like leftist, forgot to care about Israel, to start to seeing Israel before the Palestinians.
First of all, it's very true. Many leftists in Israel are looking at the Palestinians as their cause for struggle and not looking at their own people, you know, the Mizrahi Jews. But getting back to your question, first of all, everybody is to blame. You know, if we are putting responsibility, it's for everybody to take its share. I'm an Israeli, so I look at my leaders, and I have a mindset of peace. I think leaders should do everything, but really everything, to prevent wars. And I'm not sure this is the case in Israel, that they do everything. Many, many times, war is the first tool in this toolbox that they, you know, take and use. And this should be the last thing. But you know, it's a worldview, and living in Israel, you think a little differently. Plus, I think we are all motivated by anxiety and fear, and all of us.
I want to remind you a little bit of your days as a journalist, and how much is the media cooperating with these ideas, with these new ideas?
Oh, very much, because the media colors everything, you know, very dramatically, and this was very powerful during the last war in the summer, in which the media, the Israeli media, voluntarily, out of free will, decided not to show what's going on in Gaza because they were afraid that the audiences will be
move to another channel
or whatever, or will be depressed. So yeah, so the media has a huge role in that, to to inflame the situation and to put blames and to color it black and white, and
I do want to add, before we take the next question, just a recommended reading. I read about a month ago, Why AIPAC is Anti-Israel, Enough Letting the Right Have the Rhetorical Upper Hand. It was in the forward by Jay Michelson, a great blog post in the forward, one of our partners here. So you could Google that one, and worth the read. We'll take our next question here.
I have a comment and then a question. First, about if the left established Israel. I think there's no doubt about it. Clearly, Israel was not established by hardcore communists, but I think it's pretty obvious that it was established by left-wing secular Zionists, and not, for example, by the Zagutinsky movement or religious people, and by implying that if the Zionists were not hardcore communists, they were not real left, I found it doubtful. But my question is about the movie saw about kibbutzim that were established on destroyed Arab villages. And the feeling I got from the movie that you implied that the new settlement in the West Bank are maybe the same things. Are you implying that the settlement in the West Banks are the new Zionism? And do you support it?
This is what Eliakim Ha'etzny says in the film. He says, what's the difference between, uprooting Palestinians within the 67 borders and doing the same thing in Kiryat Arba where he lives? And he questioned that, and this is really a big question. And at a certain point, I think both peoples kind of came in terms with the borders of Israel being around the 67 borders, and swallowing what happened in 48 in order to get an agreement on the rest of the land. But this was a decision that was made, I think, out of debates and out of pragmatism of both peoples. But if we speak about morality and values, so it is very much valid, the question that Eliakim Ha'etzny puts to all of them, and the film doesn't take a stand on that. It just keep the question in the air.
Hi. So you mentioned that the left seems to be diminishing not in numbers, but one of my observations, you can say if this is true in your perspective or not, is that it also seems to be diminishing greatly in influence and alienating itself from the rest of society. And I was wondering what you think is, how can the left speak for and demand equality and social justice without further alienating itself in a society that's becoming more and more right-wing, and without further polarizing the society. And this is a question that's really been on my mind. I would love to hear what you have to say.
But maybe if the left would speak only about equality for the Palestinians and would raise also the equality for, you know, the Israeli, the Arab citizens of Israel, of the Ethiopians, of the Jews that came from Arab country, what it's called the Sephardic or the Mizrahi Jews, maybe it would be more appealing to the rest of the people. Once they speak only about the Palestinians and the occupation, and they turn their back to the rest of the cleavages within the society, this is very painful, and it doesn't appeal to people. They cannot identify with that. You know, they cannot rally around that only as a single flag. You know, this is what the left is. It should be across the board. It should be something very inclusive. It should speak about all these divides and inequalities, and not only on this only one issue, important as it is, and it's very important, the occupation.
So I'm curious about what you think about recent attempts to pressure Israel economically, whether through boycotts or official sanctions or state sanctions. I think, just sort of following on the last question, for a number of people on the left in this country and in other countries, part of the answer to how can we change the status quo that seems, you know, untenable is to sort of force Israel's hand, whether, you know, specifically boycotting settlement products, or as some have proposed, even boycotting universities. I'm curious as to what effect, if any, you think these sorts of actions and these sorts of ideologies will have, you know, in terms of Israeli politics.
I have no idea if it's effective or not. You know, it's many times it's an individual decision what products to buy or not to buy. I cannot recommend anybody what he or she would buy or not. I'm an Israeli and I have a right to vote for my government, and this is what I do. What, you know, citizens of the world do, it's their decision. I mean, I cannot recommend what to do.
And let's not forget that sometimes the projects that are coming from the West Bank or the settlements, Palestinians are working in these fabrics. Like, Palestinians are part of the West Bank, of the settlements. They are working together with settlers. So when you're boycotting the settlements, when you're boycotting these fabrics, you're boycotting basically also the Palestinians, because this is the place that they're going to work in. So this is a kind of a complicated situation when you want to boycott Israel because it's like putting and living in the settlements and living in the West Bank. But on the other hand, the reality is totally different. The reality is that in the West Bank you will see Palestinians and settlers working hand in hand together. This is the complexity of the situation. This is not so easy like it seems. It's not settlers on one hand and Palestinians on the other.
We're going to take one last question up here.
Because the film captures so much in all of these various aspects of the left, including economic and political and social.
Can you speak to the mic?
Yeah, sorry. It seemed to me like the film isolated So it had this like catch-all for socialism and for the left, and they were equated in my mind in the film because it was covering social, political, and economic values of socialism. But are you suggesting that it's not possible to be on the left if you're not socialist? If you don't prescribe to the ideologies that are relevant to each of those subjects? And also, could that possibly isolate, like sort of to say the opposite of what you were saying before? You were saying that in order to include people in the left ideology, in the pro-peace ideology, we should also include all these other elements, right? The social and economic. But is it possible that that might isolate people, that in the film, because it's catch-all, it makes the term left very mutually exclusive?
This is what left means. Left means, you know, first and foremost equality, and equality for all, no matter if you're, what nationality you are, what ethnic group you come from, what class, economic class you come from. This is what it means. Socialism is a very core idea, notion of what left means. This is universal left. I mean, in Israel we have created a very a mutation of that, in which you can be left vis-a-vis the occupation, but then you can be a capitalist, you know, entrepreneur within Israel and ignore all the other inequalities. And this is a mutation. It's not a genuine, you know, authentic leftist.
I know there's a lot more questions. First of all, I want to thank my guests tonight. Obviously, there's more episodes to see and more history to go through, and even then, we won't be able to resolve it in just a few hours. For those who are interested in the Ari Shavit event, there is right across the hall a live stream of the Ari Shavit event that's going to go on. That's right across the hall, up the stairs. For everyone else, thank you for being here, and continue these conversations tomorrow and Thursday as Other Israel continues.